Of course, we know about your family, we know about your father, but would you like to introduce yourself?
So I am the youngest son, not so young anymore, I'm 81, youngest son of Richard Neutra and the much younger brother of his partner and my brother Dione, who died last November.
So after retiring from your former career as an epidemiologist, you have been more involved with the Neutra Foundation, like you already said. And I'm actually curious to know how that influenced your life and what learnings did you bring with you from your previous career and life?
Because I played it out in my own career, these values about listening to people that you're affecting and being feeling that as all doctors take the Hippocratic oath to do no harm and try to do good, that these values really became my values. So in returning to the Institute, I'm bringing maybe a focus that is beyond the mere preservation of buildings as art objects. So we look at preserving the Neutra legacy as more than simply that, for example, the way that you might, I don't know whether you're familiar with the Watts Towers in Los Angeles. It's a idiosyncratic and remarkable creation of a particular gentleman who over years built these towers out of rebar and concrete and tiles. And these should be preserved as an interesting and unusual expression, but they don't have any particular message. They don't exemplify anything but a commitment to beauty, while the works of my father and brother represent a commitment to addressing a number of goals and a number of human needs that we will continue to need to address, even if we were to design a colony on the surface of Mars or a space station. So clearly there will be no sliding glass doors or overhangs or the particular solutions that my father and brother used, but those needs will still be necessary because we're still going to be human beings even on Mars or in a space station.
So talking about the early days when your father moved to the US. So we know that he was born in Austria, he grew up there, he studied there, and then he moved in the early 20s in the US because he was attracted also by its technology and propension to the use of new materials. So it was a challenge and a great opportunity for him. However, the early 20s American architecture was not exactly modernist-like. So I wonder what element, in your opinion, contributed to make your father so appreciated in the US and later, of course, also abroad?
So when he came to the United States, he was excited, as were many Europeans, by Henry Ford and the notion that you could, through mass production, make things affordable that were never affordable for most people. But at the same time, this commitment to apply it with the Wrightian commitment to nature and involving nature. So if you look at the photographs of my father's building starting in the early 30s, as he represented himself, and you look in those magazines and compare to how the other modernists were presenting himself, his photographs always are exposed in such a way so that you can see what you see outside of the windows. And even in Wright's publications, you don't see that so much. So this commitment to the joint commitment to technology and mass and prefabrication, and to the site and to the importance of the quality of light and what you see through those windows were kind of unique, unique ingredients in the recipe for his work. Then he was a relentless educator and, if you like, propagandist for what was going on in the field. He was an early American member of the Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne, and he would communicate what he was seeing in other countries.
I would like to approach your father's career from a slightly different point of view. So we know the Time magazine called your father as one of the most influential modern architects. Some say he was only second to Frank Lloyd Wright. He developed revolutionary buildings, like you also mentioned, and he was also a prolific writer. But if you have to think about one failure that helped him to move forward and improve and grow during his career, what that would be?
Well, architectural history is written from a sort of an art point of view. You don't look at Picasso as did he get better and better. Rather that you like some phase, some experimentation better than the other, and it's all a matter of personal taste. So I would say that towards the end, technology was deployed for humane purposes and was much more in the background. Then as you go along, technology has produced all kinds of other materials that are also economic. So in the 1932 Neutra VDL, there's all kinds of masonite, inexpensive wood composite products. And so already in the interior of that house, it becomes much more warm with fabrics and carpets and leather and so forth. So increasingly over time, things become more and more indoor-outdoor, and a more number of materials, and the use of reflecting pools and ever more strategic uses of mirrors to increase space. So this was not a strategic failure, but it was an example of learning something.
So you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, and your father and Frank Lloyd Wright had at least one famous client in common, which is Mr. Kaufmann. Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Falling Water, and your father designed the Kaufmann House, which you already referred to in Palm Springs. And I was wondering if there was any rivalry between them.
Well, in the book that I wrote, I sort of traced the 40 years of correspondence between the two of them, which started while my father was still in Europe and hoped that he could go and work with Wright in Japan. And then ultimately he did spend about 5 months at Taliesin in 1924 and into early 25. There's nothing in there about how Wright felt about this, but we know from other sources that he was disappointed and irritated, right? Because I think he'd actually made a provisional design. And it's not clear to me why Kaufmann decided to go with my father, but we know that Kaufmann was very much involved in the design, and one of the things that is something of a mystery to me is that while Mies and Le Corbusier, and indeed even Schindler, had floor-to-ceiling glass, and Schindler, earlier than my father, had floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors specially made in the Oliver House. My father didn't do this until the Kaufmann House. And my only guess was that he wanted to try to continue this ideology of that you would assemble architecture out of available materials, and that, for instance, in the Lovell Health House, there are the kind of factory sash which set the module of the structure to which the sash are welded. But in the Kaufmann House is the first time that you have floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors, and you have this famous corner door where the two sliding glass doors meet at an open corner with no post. And I discovered a note in 1946 from the first client conference with Kaufmann 2 weeks after the contract was signed. And in my father's writing is the note, client wishes to have Herculite glass, sliding glass doors without frames that meet at the corner. But it was not possible to do that, and I think it's still not possible to have a sliding glass door that has no frame, but he did the best he could, and indeed it did meet at the corner. And I think there's only one other Neutra building where that happens, but it was Kaufmann who drove that wonderful thing, so that living room, you have these big sliding glass doors that slide away to the side on the outside of the envelope of the building, and you have a complete flow through that corner space out to the swimming pool. And the house has radiant heat that we could either put cold or hot water through the pipes, which extended also out onto the pool deck. So as my father said, that you wouldn't burn your bottom out there sitting next to the pool. So Kaufmann apparently was very much involved. The architect, Thad Longstreth, who was working with my dad at that point in the office and later was the supervising architect of many Neutra buildings on the East Coast, in his memoir to his historian son, Richard Longstreth, said that it was his job to speak to Edgar Kaufmann every morning for about 2 hours. With Kaufmann was on the site watching the thing going up and full of ideas of what to do, and it was the Longstreths to see whether they could incorporate some of them into fend off most of the ideas from the client, which would have made the building even more expensive than it was.
It's fascinating. It's very interesting. I've been in touch once with the current owner of the Kaufmann House. Very interesting person, I would say. So, talking about the Neutra Institute, that is one of your main focus at the moment. So it was founded in 1962. Your father hoped that his name would attract donations to, I quote, I'm going to read, support environmental psychology and neuroscientific research on the impact of the designed environment. It's quite a mission, I would say. Would you like to tell us about it?
So the idea of the Institute was natural growth out of survival through design. And he hoped that he would be able to attract money to actually support that kind of research. It wasn't a very realistic assumption because that kind of research is quite expensive, particularly the neuroscientific one. And the tools for doing it weren't there yet. So there were some few publications and activities that happened, but it never took off. And then my brother kept it alive, and he had some exhibitions and some writings of his own that kept it going over the years. And finally, he decided that he would leave the bulk of his estate to this institute on his death. And at that point, he asked me to join onto the board. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I realized that the mission of the Institute hadn't been, it was very flowery and complex and not so clear. And we had a number of discussions on the board, which was a family board, not much going on with it, but we did agree to these 2 missions. One of them was the original mission, but now instead of supporting research ourselves, it would rather be to try to celebrate those who were doing research and bring it to a wider population, and then to foster people who were either doing research or applying research for humanitarian purposes, and now with the climate crisis, in a way that paid attention to what's happening now on the planet. Perhaps the Neutra brand can be helpful in getting attention that would otherwise not be so easy, because architectural magazines tend to pay more attention to the grand gesture and not so much to some of these typologies. So we're in the process now of proposing that there be a course at Cal Poly Pomona that we would pay for, that would explore these buildings and others through that lens, and develop an online course for architects, but also the architects at Cal Poly hopefully would they would develop a docent tour for the lay people that come through, and so that we would be having these 2 audiences for education about the architecture through the lens of neuroscience and environmental psychology.
Yeah, it's something that is extremely contemporary, considering the time we are living. Many cultural institutions are going the digital way, right? Museums, and not only museums, they embrace fully the digital opportunities out there, and it makes sense. It's the present, is going to be the future, and there are lots of interesting plans you have for the future of the Institute, which is really reassuring in my opinion. And of course, one of the you also mentioned that one of the goals is to educate. And when you think about students, for example, that might come and study these buildings and study the work of your father, thinking about them, what would you hope they would take away from your father's legacy?
I think it is the intention and the enduring human needs that he tried to address. And if there were failures, those are equally interesting to the successes, because as people say, you fail your way to success. And as I said before, that when the midnight temperature in Los Angeles reaches 120 degrees Fahrenheit, we're not going to design the way that my father did during his career. And yet, somehow, we're going to try to address the same physiological needs. And yes, we can sort of cower in a cool cave with no exposure to natural elements, or some creative architect will figure out how to do that, and they will pay attention to what people in Saudi Arabia and Qatar are doing now. And at the same time, we'll be challenged to do it in an energetically efficient way that doesn't chew up a lot of hydrocarbons and spew a lot of CO2 or methane into the atmosphere. So I think it's the commitments that are the most important part of the legacy, and the fact that one is attracted to the beautiful way that some of those commitments were met is sort of the enticement to pay attention to it, but ultimately it's the commitments that has to be the legacy, because things have changed dramatically.
And it's interesting if you think, if you put together all the elements you just mentioned, the human scale, the sustainability, there are all elements that your father already embraced a long time ago, and that for some reason we forgot, and now they are coming back in a very violent way, not only because of the pandemic, it was already happening before. You mentioned this Saudi Arabia example. They are building there a city that is basically an experiment of all these things together, right? It's a very interesting project over there. So yeah, I mean, probably it's a phase that we are living in, and it seems like some preoccupations that your father had finally are going to be addressed for good, hopefully, this time.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yes. So we are almost, our time is almost over, but I would like to end our chat on a personal note. Preparing for this interview, I found many times reference to your mother. And I was wondering what her role was in your father's career.
Indeed, when we talk about the Neutra legacy, it is Richard, Dione, and Dione. Dione played a crucial role, both in emotional and mechanical ways, if you like, that judging from her early letters about the marriage, she had signed on to a mission and to make that possible, and that her children were the secondary things, and she managed 3 sons, one of whom was autistic, and at the same time kept up her musical abilities while being the assistant and also the kind of the Boswell, the recorder through diaries. They entertained. They were, of course, they were immigrants, not part of this community that they had joined. And so they had a systematic thing of inviting people, and particularly when international people came, they would invite some local people as well. And my mother kept track between 1939 and 1963 of everybody who came to dinner, what she served to them and what she sang to them. And so there's something like 400 different names in this thing, that including in 1941 a reception for Fernand Léger, to which Man Ray and Noguchi came, and the Countess Tolstoy, and so that she was the one that sort of kept this whole thing going. And then after my dad's death, discovered the letters that they had written to each other through their courtship, 4-year courtship between 1919 and 1920, and then everything that was happening up through 1930. And these were handwritten, so she typed them all out in German, and then she translated them all and found a publisher so that she is a key figure that without her it just really wouldn't have worked, because she was a very optimistic, can-do, practical kind of person, and my father had great bouts of depression and enthusiasms and depression, and she was the one that kept it all together.
It's true what they say, there is always a great woman behind a great man, right?
or I have a friend of mine is Nuria Schoenberg, Nono, who is the daughter of Arnold and the wife of Luigi Nono, both of them famous composers. And a woman reporter said, "Don't you wish you had a life of your own?" And she said, "If I was the man, would you have asked me that question? Would someone ask about Boswell? Don't you wish you had a life of your own?" There are many examples of partnerships, some of them more equal, like Charles and Ray Eames, others like Aline and Eero Saarinen, where it's a more helper role, but it's we're not in isolation. Poor old Leonardo didn't have anyone like that, maybe Salah, but we forget the importance of the support and help and emotional companionship of helpers.
Absolutely. And we have to remind ourselves and others about the importance of the people that support us all the time. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I hope to hear and talk to you again. For now, I wish you a good day and thank you again.
Okay. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.